I abandoned my autistic son, not physically. I was there paying the bills, sleeping in the same house, showing up at some therapies. But I wasn't present, and the one who held everything together while I pretended to be too busy was my mother. For 3 years, she raised my son while I ran away. I ran to work. I ran to traffic. I ran to meetings I made up. I ran to my phone, to the TV, to anywhere that wasn't the living room floor where my non-verbal son repeated the same movements for hours. And my mother, she was 68 years old when the diagnosis came. She should have been enjoying retirement, traveling, resting, but instead, she woke up at 6 in the morning to give breakfast to the grandson. I barely looked in the eyes. She took him to therapy. She cleaned the floor after meltdowns. She held him when I stormed out the door because I couldn't take it anymore. I never formally asked for help. She never formally offered. It just happened. Like water flowing downhill by gravity, she filled the void my cowardice created. And then she got sick, cancer, terminal, 6 months from diagnosis to death. And in the last 48 hours, in the hospital, when I finally had nowhere left to run, she told me something that destroyed and rebuilt everything I thought I knew about fatherhood, courage, and roots. Hierocles, a Stoic philosopher from the 2nd century, taught that we live in concentric circles of responsibility. The closest circle, immediate family, is where our virtue is tested first. I spent 3 years trying to expand outer circles, career, social image, professional ego, while the inner circle rotted. And my mother, without ever having read Stoic philosophy, lived what Hierocles only theorized: oikeiosis, familial appropriation as sacred duty. In the next 40 minutes, I'm going to tell the story that shames and liberates. I'll reveal how grandmothers become roots of stability when fathers become leaves in the wind. I'll use Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism and historically absent father, to show that even philosophical giants flee from responsibility. I'll map the 5 stages of paternal flight that you might be living through right now without naming them. And I'll end with my mother's last words, which were simple but carried the weight of generations. Now, it's your turn to be a root. This video isn't about beautiful grief. It's not about easy redemption. It's about the bill that comes due when the person who protected you from your own weakness dies. It's about facing the mirror your mother held for you while she had the strength. It's about choosing to be a root or be a leaf, because now there's no one left to choose for you. Carl Jung said we carry the unlived life of our parents. My mother lived fully. There was nothing left unlived. But me, I spent 3 years not living my fatherhood, and now she's gone, and my son is still here, and I finally have no more excuses. If you're a father, mother, or grandparent who's holding what others abandoned, comment root. If you're the one who fled and you're ready to return, comment returning. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and take a deep breath, because this journey will hurt before it heals. Let's start with the hardest truth. I ran away. And you? The roots you cut. Why Hierocles knew that fleeing family is fleeing yourself. Hierocles of Alexandria drew circles. Simple as that. You in the center. Around you, family. Then, friends, community, city, country, humanity. Stoic philosophy calls us to pull the outer circles closer, exercise universal compassion, treat strangers as siblings, expand love beyond natural borders. Beautiful in theory, but Hierocles forgot to warn, you can't expand outward if you're running from within. I read Hierocles. I underlined. I agreed intellectually. And yet when the autism diagnosis came, my first instinct wasn't to pull my son closer. It was to push him away. Not literally. I didn't abandon him on the sidewalk, but emotionally, I cut the root. And when you cut the root, someone needs to become an emergency graft. In my case, it was my mother. Hierocles called the familial bond oikeiosis, natural appropriation, the sense of belonging that connects us to our own. It's instinctive, he said. Parents love children by nature, not by rational choice. But he was wrong on one crucial detail. That instinct can be suffocated. It can be rejected. It can be cut like an infected root you tear out to save the tree. Except when you tear out the root, you don't save the tree. you condemn it. I cut my paternal root at the exact moment the neurologist said, severe autism, nonverbal, uncertain prognosis. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an ego collapse, because my son wasn't just my son. He was an extension of my ego, proof of my genetics, validation of my masculinity. And when he came defective, that was the word that echoed in my mind for months. I couldn't handle it. So I fled, mentally first, emotionally after, and finally physically through justified absences. Epictetus, who was a slave, crippled, rejected by society, had the moral authority to say something it took me years to understand. You can run from the situation, but you can't run from who you are. I thought I was running from autism. I was running from myself, from my fragility, from my fear of failing as a father, from my inability to love unconditionally. And every time I ran, my mother was there, not because she was a saint, but because she understood oikeiosis in a way that I, with all my philosophical reading, didn't. For her, root wasn't a concept. It was biological reality. That boy carried her blood, and you don't abandon blood, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how exhausted you are. Root sustains, always. Carl Jung would have had a precise diagnosis for me. Pure eternus, the eternal boy. The man who refuses to mature, who flees responsibility, who lives in perpetual pursuit of adolescent freedom disguised as adult ambition. The pure can't bear weight, can't tolerate limitation. And when life imposes inevitable weight, like a child with a disability, he crumbles or disappears. I disappeared, body present, soul absent. And my mother, she embodied the opposite archetype, the great mother, the emotional container that absorbs chaos without fragmenting. She didn't have Jungian theory. She had ancestral wisdom encoded in 1,000 generations of women who held what men abandoned. But here's the truth that Hierocles whispers between the lines, and that I learned too late. When you cut your root, someone needs to bleed to reconnect you to the earth, and that someone dies a little each day. My mother didn't age normally during those 3 years. She accelerated. Hair whitened quickly, back curved, chronic insomnia, pains she didn't mention. And me? I was building a career, traveling to conferences, posting photos of professional success, while she cleaned my son's urine off the floor at 2 p.m. on some random Tuesday. The Stoics talk a lot about virtue, about courage, justice, wisdom, temperance, but they rarely talk about the opposite, cowardice disguised as pragmatism. I said, I need to work more to pay for therapies. Technical truth, emotional lie. Because what I really needed was courage to sit on the floor with my son and accept that he would never be what I had planned. And Hierocles would say, you didn't flee from autism. You fled from the inner circle. And when you do that, all the other circles collapse. Your career became neurotic compensation. Your marriage became a battlefield. Your friends became the audience for your performance as a successful man. All lies built on the only truth that mattered. You abandoned the root. Seneca wrote, it's not because things are difficult that we don't dare. It's because we don't dare that they are difficult. I thought autism was too difficult. The truth? My cowardice made everything impossible. And my mother paid the price of my lack of daring. When you cut the root, you don't become free, you become loose, a leaf in the wind, and wind has no direction, only turbulence. My mother was a root. I became a leaf, and it took 3 years and a death sentence to understand that leaves don't sustain anything, they only fall. The question now is, are you a root or a leaf? And if you're a leaf, who's bleeding to keep you connected? Tuesday, 2:37 p.m. The exact moment you chose slides over blood. Tuesday, 2:37 p.m. My phone buzzes in my pocket during the quarterly budget meeting. I glance discreetly. It's my mother. 3rd time in 2 hours. I silence it. I return to the PowerPoint slides about growth projections. 2:52 p.m. 4th call. Message, he's having a meltdown. I can't anymore, please. I read it. I take a deep breath. I type, I'm in an important meeting. In 2 hours I'll check, try to calm him. I put the phone away. I continue the presentation. At that moment, 47 kilometers away, my 69-year-old mother is on the living room floor. My 6-year-old son, 28 kilograms of muscle tension and sensory dysregulation, is banging his head against the wall. She's tried everything. Soft music, lights off, firm hug. Nothing works. He won't stop. She has arthritis in her knees. She shouldn't be on the floor, but she is, because I'm discussing profit margins while my son bleeds from his forehead. Seneca wrote something I should have tattooed on my forehead. It's not that we have little time, it's that we waste so much. That meeting, totally dispensable. My presence, replaceable. But in my house's living room, only one person in the entire world could replace my mother at that moment. Me. And I chose slides. The invisible cost grandparents pay. I'm going to be surgical here because someone needs to say it. Grandparents who raise autistic grandchildren while parents flee pay with their bodies. My mother developed uncontrolled hypertension, chronic stress, severe insomnia, 24-hour hypervigilance, chronic lower back pain, carrying a child too big, complete social isolation, friends stopped inviting her, silent depression, never diagnosed, always denied. And you know what's most devastating? She never complained, not because everything was fine, but because complaining would mean admitting I had failed. And mothers protect their children even from the truth about their own children. Epictetus would say she practiced amor fati, love of fate. But it wasn't philosophy, it was generational martyrdom. She didn't choose to love that fate, she simply accepted it. Because the alternative, my son without care, was unbearable. How many Tuesdays at 2:37 p.m. existed? Hundreds, each one with a variation of the same theme: child in crisis, father busy, grandmother holding the collapse alone. And every time I didn't answer, I was saying something silent but devastating. Your life is worth less than my career. Your body is worth less than my professional reputation. Your exhaustion is worth less than my comfort. Practical protocol, identifying your flight patterns in real time. If you're reading this and recognize the scene, here's the Stoic protocol I should have used. Step 1, pattern detection. Prosoch. When you receive a call about a crisis, before reacting automatically ask, am I really unable or am I choosing impossibility? Important meetings exist. Emergency surgery exists. But 80% of professional urgencies are ego theater, and you know it. Step 2, applied dichotomy of control. What's under your control now? End the meeting? Yes. Delegate the presentation? Yes. Leave and go home? Yes. Control the boss's opinion? No. Control your son's crisis? No, but you can be present in it. Marcus Aurelius governed Rome and still found time for his children. You don't govern Rome. You govern fear of disappointing. Step 3, regret calculation. Ask, if my mother died today, would I regret having stayed in this meeting? The answer is always yes, always. But your brain rationalizes she won't die today, until the day she does, and then there's no Tuesday to take back. Step 4, immediate action against pattern. If you identified flight, do the opposite now. Not in a bit, not when I finish this. Now, stand up, excuse yourself, leave. Let them judge, because professional judgment recovers. A destroyed grandmother's body doesn't recover. A child in crisis's trust doesn't recover. What my mother sacrificed while I built a career. Let me translate building a career into honest language. While I was building a career, my mother was cancelling her own medical appointments to take my son to therapy, eating cold leftovers because she didn't have time to heat them during meltdowns, sleeping 4 hours a night because he woke up and I didn't hear or pretended not to hear, losing friendships because she couldn't go out without advance notice, aging 10 years in 3 because chronic stress destroys cells. And me, I got a promotion. I traveled to an international conference. I bought a new car. I posted photos of professional achievement. Seneca was brutal about this. While we postpone life, it passes. My mother didn't postpone. She lived. She just lived my responsibility while I postponed fatherhood. The bill always comes due Tuesday, 2:37 p.m. I didn't answer. My son banged his head until he passed out from exhaustion. My mother called an ambulance alone, took him to the hospital alone, signed the responsibility form as responsible grandmother alone. I arrived at 7 p.m., everything already resolved, him sleeping, her exhausted in the hallway. She looked at me and said only, "It's all fine, it's over." It wasn't fine, it never was. But I accepted the lie because it was convenient, because if she told the truth, "You abandoned me," I would have to face who I really was. The Stoics talk about memento mori, remember that you will die. But there's another forgotten memento. Memento mater mori, remember that your mother will die, and when she dies, all the Tuesdays you didn't answer will return as ghosts. I have 47 ghosts. One for each Tuesday I chose slides over blood. And you? How many ghosts are you collecting now? Zeno of Citium, the absent father. How the founder of Stoicism abandoned his family and paid the price. You've probably never heard this version of the story. Philosophy books prefer to omit it. But Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, intellectual father of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, was a terrible biological father. Cyprus, 4th century BC. Zeno was a purple merchant, an extremely expensive dye used by the Roman elite. He married young, had a wife, had children. Historical records are vague, but at least 2. And then the event happened that would change the history of philosophy: shipwreck. He lost everything. Cargo, wealth, commercial future. He arrived in Athens with nothing. He entered a bookstore by chance, read Xenophon about Socrates. Something broke inside him. He asked the bookseller, "Where do I find men like this?" The bookseller pointed to Crates, a cynic philosopher passing by on the street. Zeno followed him and never went home again. Not immediately, not literally, but emotionally, he left that day. He spent the next 10 years studying philosophy, founded the Stoic school, gathered disciples, wrote treatises on virtue, duty, family, responsibility, and his own family. There are fragments of letters from his wife found centuries later, begging for money, asking when he would return, saying the children no longer recognized him. Zeno didn't return. He sent money when he had it. But presence, zero. He was too busy creating philosophy about how to live virtuously himself. And here's what historians rarely emphasize: he died with regret. The paradox of the fleeing philosopher. Diogenes Laertius, ancient historian, recorded something devastating. In the last years of his life, Zeno had melancholic collapses. He would isolate himself for days. Disciples would ask what was wrong. He wouldn't answer. But there's a preserved letter, authenticity debated but probably real, where Zeno, already old, writes to a friend, "I taught 1,000 men about duty, but I failed in the first duty, to be present for those who gave me continuity." This isn't in popular Stoicism books. It's in academic fragments no one reads, because it's inconvenient, because it destroys the myth of the unshakable Stoic sage. The truth is this: Zeno created philosophy about familial virtue while neglecting his own family. He theorized orcheosis, familial appropriation, probably because he felt guilt for having abandoned his own. All philosophy is, at some level, compensation for personal wounds. And me, I read Zeno, I underlined his teachings, I cited him in conversations, and I reproduced exactly his mistake, building intellectual, professional identity while the family crumbles. Except I didn't have the excuse of a shipwreck. I didn't have a revolutionary philosophical discovery. I had Excel, PowerPoint, and cowardice disguised as ambition. The price Zeno paid, and that you will pay. Historical records suggest Zeno's children publicly rejected him as adults. One of them, name lost to history, appeared in Athens when Zeno was already famous. Disciples expected an emotional reunion, father and son, philosophical reconciliation. It didn't happen. The son looked at Zeno, surrounded by admiring students, and said something like, "You teach strangers about paternal duty, but you never taught me even my own name," and he left. Zeno remained silent, didn't argue back, didn't justify, because there was no justification. And his disciples for the first time saw the master cry. This scene isn't confirmed by multiple sources, but it's mentioned in fragments, and even if it's apocryphal, it's symbolically true, because every absent father eventually faces this moment, the grown child who doesn't recognize him as moral authority. I was lucky, if you can call it that. My son is non-verbal. He'll never confront me with words, but he confronts me with absence, with a gaze that doesn't seek me, with meltdowns that don't calm with my presence, because he didn't register my presence as safe. Autistic children don't verbalize rejection, but they neurologically register who was there and who wasn't, and I wasn't. My mother was. The brutal lesson: knowledge isn't character. Zeno knew everything about virtue, wrote treatises, had disciples, influenced emperors, but when it came to applying virtue where it mattered most, at home, with those who depended on him, he failed. This should terrify us, because it means you can read all the books on conscious parenting, do all the therapies, understand all the psychological concepts, and still flee. Because knowledge is in the head, character is in daily choices, and daily choices require courage, not information. Marcus Aurelius, who studied Zeno religiously, tried not to repeat the mistake. There are records that he would stop imperial meetings to have dinner with his children, that he took his children on state trips, that he wrote about paternal love not as theory, but as practice. And yet Commodus, his only surviving son, became a corrupt tyrant. Marcus Aurelius did everything right, and the result was catastrophic. So what's the lesson? That there are no guarantees, but there's a moral difference between failing while trying and failing while fleeing. Zeno fled. Marcus Aurelius tried. I fled, and my mother tried for me. Late regret doesn't erase damage. Zeno died at 72 years old. It said he tripped leaving the school, broke his finger and said, I come, why do you call me?" He struck the ground with his hand and died. Interpretation: he saw the accident as a sign from the gods that it was time to depart, and he obeyed. Romantic, philosophical, beautiful for biographies, but there's another less noble interpretation. He was exhausted from carrying guilt, and when the opportunity to exit arose, he accepted with relief. His children weren't at the funeral, or if they were, they weren't recorded. Hundreds of disciples mourned, biological family absent. This is the legacy of every absent father. You're remembered by strangers and forgotten by blood. I don't want that. I don't want my son, verbal or not, to register my absence as the definition of me. I don't want my mother to die, knowing she was more of a father to him than I was. But wanting isn't enough. Zeno also wanted in the end, but it was too late. And too late is the definitive Stoic tragedy. Do you still have time? Then use it. Because one day the finger breaks, the ground calls, and there are no more Tuesdays at 2:37 p.m. to fix it. The 5 stages of paternal flight. Mapping how you abandoned without leaving home. You didn't wake up one day and decide to abandon your child. Nobody does that. Paternal flight is a gradual, invisible, socially acceptable process. You remain physically present while evaporating emotionally, and society even applauds. What a dedicated father, working so hard to provide. But financial provision without emotional presence isn't fatherhood, it's outsourcing with a salary. In the next few minutes, I'll map the 5 stages I went through, and that you, if you're honest, will recognize in yourself. Not to blame you, but to wake you up before it's too late. Before whoever's holding everything together, your mother, your wife, someone collapses. Stage 1, diagnosis denial. It's not autism, it's just a delay. He'll catch up. This is the first shield against reality. You hear the neurologists say autism spectrum disorder, but your brain translates it as still not confirmed, might be wrong. I spent 6 months in this stage. 6 months refusing a second opinion because doctors make mistakes. 6 months telling my wife, "You're overreacting." 6 months blocking my mother when she suggested early intervention. Why? Because accepting the diagnosis meant accepting that my son, an extension of me, had a defect, and I couldn't be father to a defective child. That would destroy my self-image as a successful man. Superior genetics, guaranteed future. Epictetus would say, "It's not facts that disturb men, but opinions about facts." Autism was a fact. My shame about autism, that was opinion. And I chose to deny the fact to protect the opinion. How to identify if you're here? You still say, "But he's so intelligent," as if intelligence cancelled out autism. You avoid using the word autistic. You postpone evaluations. You blame school, pediatrician, wife, anyone but the genetics you contributed. Consequence. While you deny, early intervention doesn't happen. And who suffers? Your son, who loses a critical neurological window, and your mother-wife, who carries guilt for overreacting. A stage 2, compensatory hyperwork. I need to provide. Therapy is expensive. Someone has to pay. When denial no longer works, you change strategy. Justified hyperwork. You're not fleeing, you're providing. It's noble. It's paternal sacrifice. Lie. I work 12 hours a day, weekends in the office, unavoidable trips. And when anyone questioned, I exploded. You think therapy pays for itself? With prayer? I had technical truth. Therapy is expensive. But I had emotional lie. I worked excessively not to pay for therapy, but to avoid being present at therapies. Because being present meant facing reality, meant seeing my son make millimeter progress while other children took leaps, meant sitting in a waiting room with other parents and admitting I was one of them, father of someone neurodivergent. Seneca wrote, "It's not that we have little time, it's that we waste so much." I wasted 2 years in compensatory hyperwork. 2 years my mother spent taking my son to therapies while I paid for them. How to identify if you're here? Your salary increased, but your presence decreased. You know the names of all your co-workers, but not your son's therapists. You buy expensive gifts to compensate for absence. You use money as proof of love. Consequence, your child doesn't need a distant provider. He needs a present father. And your mother doesn't need money for a taxi to therapy. She needs you to drive there. Stage 3. Emotional distancing. My mother, handles it better. He calms down more with her. This is the most cowardly stage. You rationalize absence as someone else's competence. He prefers grandma. My wife has more patience. I just make him worse. All convenient lies. Children don't prefer anyone instinctively. They attach to whoever's consistently present. My son calmed down with my mother because she was there during the 500 previous meltdowns. I was there for 2. Obviously, he registered neurologically. Grandma, safety, father, absence. And I used this as an excuse to distance myself more. See, he doesn't even want me. Perfect self-fulfilling prophecy. Carl Jung would call this projection. I attributed to my son my own rejection. I didn't want to be there, but it was unbearable to admit. So I inverted it. He didn't want me there. How to identify if you're here? You say, "I don't know how to handle it, but never tried to learn." You leave the room when he has a meltdown. You hand him to someone at the first difficulty. You've convinced yourself you're incompetent to justify desertion. Consequence, you create a vicious cycle. The less present you are, the less he recognizes you as safe. The less he recognizes you, the more you pull away, and your mother-wife becomes prisoner of the role you abandoned. Stage 4. Creating a parallel life. I need space. I can't live only for his autism. When emotional distancing isn't enough, you build a parallel life, obsessive hobby, gym at strategic hours, friends who don't know you, have a neurodivergent child, emotional or physical affair. I had a parallel life, happy hour every Friday, soccer Saturday morning, fishing Sunday. I always had a commitment, always had a need to decompress. And my mother, she didn't decompress, she didn't have happy hours. hour. She had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with my son. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't act as if you had 10,000 years ahead." I acted exactly that way, as if I had infinite time to later be a father, as if my mother were immortal, as if my son would wait for me to find myself. How to identify? If you're here, you have an active social life that doesn't include your child. You plan weekends without considering him. You have hobbies that consume time that should be his. You've built an identity separate from fatherhood. Consequence: you're not decompressing, you're fleeing. And who doesn't flee? The person entering burnout while you play soccer. Stage 5, inevitable collapse. I didn't know it was that bad. Nobody told me. Eventually, the structure collapses. Whoever was holding everything gets seriously ill, or dies, or has a breakdown. And you look around like someone waking from a coma. How did we get here? You got here through the previous 4 stages, and worse, you were warned dozens of times. But you interpreted warnings as complaints, as someone else's weakness, as exaggeration, until the day it's no longer exaggeration, it's ICU, it's funeral, it's divorce, it's irreversible collapse. I woke up when my mother fainted in the kitchen, advanced cancer she'd hidden for months because she didn't want to worry. Because even terminally ill, she still protected me from reality. Epictetus said, "Circumstances don't make the man. They only reveal him." Cancer didn't create my cowardly character. It only revealed what was always there. If you're in stage 5, you have 2 choices. Enter denial again, "It wasn't my fault," or finally wake up and assume responsibility that was always yours. I chose to wake up, but too late to ask forgiveness while she could still respond. The key sees that your grandmother is the archetype of the great mother, what she carried that you rejected. Carl Jung identified something ancestral peoples always knew intuitively. There exists a universal pattern of motherhood that transcends biology. He called it the Great Mother, not your literal mother, but the archetype of the cosmic nurturer, the emotional container, the root from which all life flows. And when I abandoned my son, my mother didn't just assume responsibility, she embodied the archetype. Let me be clear, she wasn't a saint, wasn't perfect, had days she screamed, cried in hiding, called friends venting that she couldn't take it anymore. But she stayed. And that permanence, that absolute refusal to abandon, is the essence of the Great Mother. Jung would say every human being carries this archetype in the collective unconscious, but not everyone can access it. I, for example, couldn't access even the father archetype, much less something deeper. I was trapped in the puer aeternus, the eternal boy who refuses to mature. And my mother? She had already traversed all Jungian phases of individuation. She had already raised children, including me, already faced death. My father, 15 years earlier, already integrated shadow, anima, self. She was psychologically equipped for something I wasn't, loving without projection. Because here's the secret Jung discovered, and it took me 40 years to understand. You can only truly love when you've stopped using the other to heal your wounds. Why grandparents can do what parents can't. There's a psychological and neurological reason grandparents handle autism better than parents. It's not just experience, it's healthy emotional distance. When my son was born, he wasn't just a baby, he was an ego project. A narcissistic extension, proof that my genetics were good, that I would be a better father than my father was, that I had value as a man. I had invested my entire identity in him before he existed. So when the diagnosis came, it wasn't just my son who failed. It was me who failed. My genetics, my legacy, my masculinity, unbearable. My mother, she didn't have any of that invested. She had already proven fertility. 3 children, already proven maternal competence. We turned out reasonably functional. She didn't need my son to be perfect to validate anything, so she could just love him as he was. Jung would call this detached love, not in the sense of coldness, but of liberation. She loved without needing him to fill her gaps. And children, especially autistic ones with hypersensitive emotional radar, feel this difference. My son calmed with her because she didn't emanate desperation, didn't transmit subtle disappointment, didn't carry violent expectation of change. She was a stable emotional container, a root, and I was an emotional hurricane disguised as strategic absence. Synchronicity. She was preparing without knowing. Jung developed the concept of synchronicity, meaningful non-causal events, things that happen at exactly the right moment, without apparent logical connection. My mother had severe depression after my father's death, spent 5 years in deep therapy, did complete Jungian analysis. She didn't even know it was Jungian, but it was. Worked through complexes, integrated shadow, made peace with death, and then 10 years later an autistic grandson appears whose cowardly son abandons. Coincidence? Jung would say no. Her psyche was preparing unconsciously for the role to come. She needed to make that descent into personal hell, to have the strength to hold someone else's hell later. Me, on the other hand, I never did therapy until recently. Never confronted wounds, never descended. So when my son needed an emotional container, I had nothing to offer. I was empty, fragmented, immature, and my mother, who had already traversed fire, could now hold someone else's fire without being completely burned. The mother complex of the adult son. Here's the part that hurts. I allowed my mother to take over, not out of her altruism, but my psychological regression. Jung identified the mother complex in adult men, the inability to psychologically separate from mother, to assume adult responsibility, to stop expecting someone to solve everything. When the diagnosis came, my mother complex activated. Unconsciously, I expected my mother to handle it, like she always did when I was a child, like she always did with my problems, and she handled it, because it was easier for her to handle it than watch her grandson collapse while her son remained immature. But here's the horror. I infantilized her by assuming she was inexhaustible. The archetypal great mother is inexhaustible. A human mother isn't. She has a 70-year-old body, arthritis, hypertension, finite reserves. But in my immature psyche, she was an infinite source. So I drained, without asking permission, without considering cost, like a child nurses without thinking if the mother is exhausted. This isn't filial love, it's psychological vampirism, transcendent function. She integrated what you fragmented. Jung developed the concept of the transcendent function, psychic capacity to integrate opposites, love and anger, acceptance and struggle, hope and realism. Mature people integrate. Immature ones fragment. I fragmented. Either I totally denied autism or entered total despair. There was no middle ground. There was no, he has autism and I love him. It was, he has autism, therefore I flee, or if I stay, I'll collapse. Now, my mother integrated, he has autism, it's difficult, it hurts, and I'll be here every day. This is the transcendent function in action, holding paradox without collapsing, loving and suffering simultaneously without denying either. Epictetus would say, it's not what happens to you, but how you react. Jung would say, the mature reaction integrates, the immature reaction fragments. My mother integrated, I fragmented. And who paid the price of my fragmentation? She did. The archetypal message. In the end, my mother wasn't just a grandmother assuming responsibility. She was a living symbol of something I rejected, emotional maturity. She had traversed individuation, had integrated self, could love without destroying herself, though she wore herself physically. I had none of that. I was a child in an adult's body, eternal poor. And when reality demanded I grow up, I fled. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. My mother became who she was, root, container, great mother. I was still pretending to be something else, and the price of that lie she paid with her body. Now she's gone. And the question that haunts me every night, will I finally grow up? Or will I look for someone else to be my mother? Her last gift, why your mother never confronted you and why that's terrible. Here's the truth that will turn your stomach. Your mother knew exactly what you were doing. She saw the flight, saw the cowardice, saw you choosing work, hobbies, anything but your child, and she never confronted you, not because she agreed, not because she thought it was right, but because she calculated with ancestral wisdom no psychologist teaches that if she confronted you, you would flee completely. And then who would care for the grandson? Nobody. So she chose to carry the weight alone, in silence, until her body couldn't take it anymore. And that, my friend, isn't beautiful unconditional love from a movie. It's sacrifice that kills. Cleanthes, Zeno's successor, wrote the hymn to Zeus, a Stoic prayer about accepting cosmic fate. The essence, lead me where you've decided. I'll follow willingly, and if I resist, I'll follow anyway. Suffering. My mother followed willingly. She accepted the fate of being a root when her son chose to be a leaf, not because she wanted to, but because the alternative, abandoned child, was unbearable. And me, I allowed it. I interpreted her silence as approval. If she complained, I'd change. But she doesn't complain, so it must be fine. Convenient lie. She didn't complain because she knew you better than you knew yourself. Ancestral wisdom. She understood what therapists take years to explain. My mother never read Jung, never took a course on nonviolent communication, never watched a TED Talk about conscious parenting, but she knew intuitively something modern psychology confirms. Direct confrontation with an immature man generates defensiveness, not change. If she had said, "You're abandoning your child," I would have responded with anger, justified, listed everything I did, provide financially, pay for therapies, made her feel guilty for not recognizing my effort. And in the end, I would have distanced myself more now with moral justification. She doesn't support me. She knew this. So she chose a different strategy, silent presence as witness. She didn't fight, didn't charge, didn't accuse. She was just there, every day, like a silent mirror reflecting my absence, waiting, perhaps, for me to wake up on my own one day. Buddhism calls this upaya, skillful means, compassion that adapts to the other's capacity. She couldn't force me to grow, so she protected who she could protect, my son, and waited for me to eventually grow. I didn't grow in time. The silent cost of non-confrontation. But here's the horror. Not confronting had a devastating cost on her. Stored resentment becomes cellular inflammation. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology confirm repressed emotions affect the immune system. Unexpressed anger becomes hypertension. Swallowed sadness becomes depression. Chronic overload becomes cancer. I'm not saying I caused her cancer, but I am saying 3 years of emotional, physical, and psychological overload, carrying weight that was mine, accelerated deterioration that perhaps could have been postponed. She had friends. They stopped calling because every conversation became venting about grandson, and she was ashamed to complain about her coward son. She had hobbies, abandoned them all because she had no energy left over. She had a life. It became an extension of my irresponsibility. Seneca wrote, "We don't receive a short life, we make it short." My mother didn't have a short life. I shortened her life, not with a weapon, with absence. And she never confronted me because she knew immature man confronted becomes absent man, and total absence is worse than partial absence. She chose the lesser of evils and paid with everything. The devastating paradox. Love that protects the son from his own immaturity. Here's what almost destroyed me when I understood. She wasn't just protecting my son. She was protecting me from myself. If she confronted me and I fled completely, I would carry unbearable guilt for the rest of my life. Guilt that could lead me to mental collapse, addictions, suicide. She knew my psychological fragility. She raised me. She knew I couldn't bear the weight of explicit abandonment. So she created a protective fiction. It's all fine. Grandma loves taking care of grandson. You work in peace. She lied to protect me. Like a mother lies to a small child that the monster doesn't exist under the bed. Except I wasn't small. I was a 40-year-old adult acting like a 5-year-old child. And she, in the role of archetypal great mother, absorbed my terror, my immaturity, my cowardice, so I wouldn't implode. Is this love? Yes. Is it healthy? No. Is it terrible? Absolutely. Because it infantilized me even more. Because it gave me implicit permission to continue being immature. Because it postponed my mandatory growth until the most painful moment possible, her death. Cleanthes and acceptance as survival survival strategy. Cleanthes didn't teach acceptance as passivity. He taught it as strategy when you have no power to change the other. My mother had no power to change me. She could scream, cry, threaten, beg, and I wouldn't change. Because real change comes from within, not from external coercion, so she accepted, not the ideal, but the possible. My son won't grow now, so I'll do what needs to be done and trust that one day he'll wake up. This acceptance wasn't weakness. It was strategic calculation for emotional survival. If she fed anger toward me, she would collapse. So she channeled energy toward my son, not toward hating me. But here's the final paradox. By protecting me from the consequences of my irresponsibility, she guaranteed I would continue being irresponsible. Children don't mature without consequence. Man-children don't either, and she, by absorbing all the consequences, kept me a child until she died. And now the consequences arrived all at once. There's no more safety net, no more someone to hold, no more anyone to blame, to outsource to turn to. She's gone, and she left me the last gift, inevitable responsibility. Why this is terrible. You might be thinking, but she loved. That's beautiful. No, it's not. It's tragic. Because she died carrying weight that was never hers, because she sacrificed final years of life that could have been peaceful, because she protected her adult son from growing until she had no more life to see him grown. Epictetus said, "No man is free if he's not master of himself." My mother gave me everything except the chance to be master of myself while she lived, and that, paradoxically, was the greatest disservice disguised as greatest love. Now I've grown, but too late to thank her. In the last words, "Now it's your turn to be a root," her Stoic testament. Hospital, room 412, 11:47 p.m. on a Friday. Morphine no longer controlled the pain. She was conscious, but drifting in and out of lucidity. Doctors gave hours, maybe until dawn. I was alone with her. My wife had taken my son home. First moment truly alone with my mother in 3 years. Cruel irony, I needed her to be dying to finally stop fleeing. She opened her eyes, saw me, smiled weakly, grabbed my hand with surprising strength for someone saying goodbye to life, and said 6 words I carry tattooed on my soul. "Now it's your turn to be a root." She didn't say, "Take care of your son," didn't say, "Don't run away," didn't say, "You failed." She said exactly what needed to be said, the way only a mother who's known you 40 years can say it. Now, it's your turn, because it was always my turn. But while she was alive, I had an escape, had a safety net, had someone to take over when I wanted to disappear. Now, I didn't anymore. To be a root, not a leaf, not an occasional visitor, not a distant provider, a root. Something that sustains, that doesn't move, that faces the storm without fleeing because there's nowhere to go. A root doesn't have the luxury of choice. A root either is or isn't. What she really said. Verse is, what I heard at that moment, I heard a request. Please take care of him when I'm no longer here. Today, 5 years later, I understand. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Marcus Aurelius differentiated between request and inner command. A request you can refuse. An inner command is a call from your own soul. You can ignore it, but you live knowing you betrayed who you should be. She wasn't asking a favor. She was naming a reality I'd been avoiding for years. You were always the only one responsible. I just held on while you matured. Now time's up to mature. It's now or never. But at the time, my perception was distorted by guilt, by pain, by panic at losing her. So I promised. I will, Mom. I promise. I'll take care of him. She squeezed my hand, closed her eyes. And 3 hours later, at 2:34 a.m. Saturday, she departed. I didn't cry immediately. I was paralyzed. Because the moment she died, something inside me died too. The illusion that I had a choice. Memento mori. She died. There's no more safety net. The Stoics meditated daily on death. Memento mori, remember that you will die, not to be morbid, but to live with urgency, without postponing the essential. But there's another memento I learned the most painful way. Memento illos mori, remember that they will die, the people you depend on, who hold what you abandon, who protect you from your own immaturity. They're not eternal, and when they die, there's no pause, no second chance, no, now I learned, give me another chance. My mother died, and my son woke up Saturday morning expecting grandma, and she wasn't there and would never be again. And who was there? Me, the father he barely recognized, the man who passed by him like a ghost for the last 3 years, and I had to explain to a nonverbal autistic child that grandma wouldn't come back. How do you explain death to someone who doesn't understand abstraction? You don't explain, you show. You're present in his despair, in the inconsolable crying, in the nights he wakes up looking for her. And for the first time, I was. Not because I became a saint, but because I had no more options. Amor fati, loving the fate she left you. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, betrayals, unimaginable losses, and he developed amor fati, love of fate, not passive resignation, but active, fierce acceptance of what is. I didn't choose for my mother to die, didn't choose for her to die while I was still immature, didn't choose to inherit responsibility that should always have been mine at maximum despair, but it happened, and I had 2 choices: collapse or grow. Flee even farther, institutionalize my son, abandon completely, disappear, or finally become a root. Amor fati isn't liking what happened. It's loving the opportunity to become who you need to be through what happened. My mother died. That's brutal reality. But she died leaving me a summons. Be a root, and I can reject this summons and live as a coward until I die. Or I can accept it and finally honor the 3 years she lived in my place. Seneca wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it." My mother used it well, until the last second, until the last words chosen with surgical precision. Now it's my turn to use well what remains. The final summons: you can keep fleeing, but now you'll be an orphan and absent father. Here's the final truth that shatters any last illusion. When she died, my excuse died with her. While she was alive, I could rationalize. He's well cared for. She handles it better. I provide financially. It's all working. Now, there's no working. There's me or institutionalization. There's me or total neglect. There's me or definitive betrayal of everything she sacrificed. Epictetus said, "Difficulties are things that show what men are." My mother's death showed what I was. Man-child who needed mother to function even at 40 years old. And it gave me the final choice: remain man-child forever, or finally grow up. I chose to grow, not because I'm a hero, but because the alternative, looking in the mirror and seeing irreversible coward, was unbearable. Root isn't metaphor, it's daily commitment. 5 years later, I am a root. Not perfect, not idealized, but a root. I wake up every day at 6 a.m., prepare my son's coffee the way he accepts it. Blue mug, exact temperature, no foam. Take him to therapy. Sit in the waiting room reading Marcus Aurelius while he works with the therapist. Pick him up. Give lunch. Manage the afternoon meltdown. Give dinner. Sleep ritual. And then, when he sleeps, I finally breathe. And some nights I cry. Not from self-pity, but from longing. From regret, from impossible desire to go back in time and thank her while she still breathed. But crying doesn't change the past. It only cleans the present so I can continue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The life you have now is the only one you'll have." I no longer have my mother, no longer have a chance to do differently in the 3 years I wasted. But I have today. I have tomorrow. I have every day that remains until I die. And every day I choose to be a root, not because it's beautiful, but because she asked, because he needs it, because I owe it. And if you're reading this and you recognize your story in mine, here's the summons I pass forward. Be a root before whoever's being a root for you dies. Because after they die, you live the rest of your life with an unanswerable question. What if I had woken up in time? I didn't wake up in time. You still can. Now it's your turn to be a root. Conclusion: 40 minutes ago, you started this video, maybe expecting another story about autism, maybe looking for management strategies, maybe just avoiding what you really need to do now. But what you received was a mirror. not about your son, about you. We revisited Hierocles and the circles you abandoned. We descended to Tuesday, 2:37 p.m., when you didn't answer and someone answered for you. We walked with Zeno, founder of Stoicism and absent father, through the contradiction between philosophy and real life. We mapped the 5 stages of flight you might be going through now without naming them. We explored with Jung the archetype of the great mother, your mother, wife, someone embodies, while you remain eternal pure. We confronted the devastating paradox. She never confronted you because she knew confrontation would push you further away. And we closed at the deathbed with 6 words that change everything. Now it's your turn to be a root. 7 sections, 7 truths, 1 central message. You're not a victim of your child's autism. You're a coward before your own life, and someone is paying the price of your cowardice. And now, what do you do with this awareness? You have 3 choices. Choice 1, denial. Close this video. Say, that's not me. Keep fleeing until there's nowhere left to flee, until whoever's holding everything collapses, and then you'll remember this moment and think, I was warned. Choice 2, paralyzing guilt. Enter a spiral of self-flagellation. I'm a monster. I'm irredeemable. I destroyed everything. Guilt that doesn't generate change, only paralysis. The Stoics rejected this. Guilt is useless. Responsibility is everything. Choice 3, painful growth. Wake up. Today. Now. Not tomorrow. Not after I resolve this. Get up from the couch. Go to where your child is. Sit on the floor with him and begin, without waiting to feel motivated, without waiting to be ready. Because roots don't wait for the perfect season to grow. Roots grow in the soil they have, in the time they have, with the water they have. Marcus Aurelius wrote, stop arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Stop arguing whether you should be a present father. Be one. Stop planning when you'll change. Change. Stop waiting for someone to give you permission, motivation, or guarantee of success. Your mother gave you the only permission that matters. Now it's your turn. And if she's no longer here to hear, live in a way that if she were watching, she would finally rest in peace knowing you woke up. And if she's still here, holding everything while you flee, run, don't walk. Run to where she is, look in her eyes, and say 3 words that will change 2 lives. I'm taking over now. Not I'll help more, not I'll improve. I'm taking over. Total responsibility. Unconditional. Definitive. Epictetus said, how long will you wait before you demand the best of yourself? How long? Your mother doesn't have infinite time. Your son doesn't have infinite childhood. You don't have infinite life. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. And when you die, you won't regret having worked less. You won't regret having missed a promotion. You'll regret having missed presence. If this video awakened something inside you, anger, pain, shame, hope, comment I am root. 3 words that are a vow. Public testimony that you chose to grow. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and especially share with that father, that mother, that grandmother who's alone holding the weight. Because maybe, just maybe, this video is the Tuesday 2:37 p.m. that finally wakes someone up. My mother died being a root. I live trying to honor that. And you? Will you keep being a leaf? Or will you finally descend to the earth and create roots? Time is passing. Whoever's holding everything is getting tired, and life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Now it's your turn to be a root.